My name is Miss Erica from the St. Catharines Public Library. Welcome to Fairytale Friday. Let's find out what fairy tale we're going to be talking about today. It's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So we will be reading that fairy tale, and also if you stick around to the end of the video, I'll show you how to make a witch's brew. Alright, so let's read our story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So, once on a snowy winter day, a queen sat sewing at her window. She said, "If only I had a child with skin as white as snow, lips as red as blood, and hair as black as ebony." As it happened, such a daughter was born to the queen, and she named her Snow White. But soon after the royal birth, the queen sadly died. When a year had passed, the king married again, and this queen was very beautiful, but she was very vain. Every day, the new queen would ask her magic mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" And the mirror would reply, "Queen, thou art the fairest of us all." The queen was content, but as Snow White grew up, she became more and more lovely, until the day arrived where the mirror said, "Queen, thou art the fairest in the hall, but Snow White is fairer than all of us." These words filled the queen with rage, and she ordered her huntsman to take Snow White into the forest and hurt her. But the huntsman couldn't do it, and he said, "Run away then, my poor child." And Snow White ran into the woods, past the towering trees, over sharp rocks, and past wild beasts and black shadows, and she ran and ran until she came to a cottage. Snow White knocked on the door, but no one was home. So she went into the cottage, and there she found 7 little plates and 7 little knives, forks and spoons and cups on a table, as well as 7 beds along the wall. Snow White ate some bread and some vegetables from each of the plates and took a sip from each one of the cups. And she tried each one of the beds until she lay down on the last one. When it grew dark, the owners of the cottage returned, and they were the 7 dwarfs who worked in the mines, mining gold and precious gems all day long. As they entered the house, each holding a lantern, they saw that someone had been in their cottage. And they asked, "Who has been sitting in my chair? Who has been eating from my plate? Who has been eating my bread? Who has been using my knife? Who has been eating all my vegetables? Who has been using my fork? Who has been drinking from my cup?" The first dwarf noticed that his bed was rumpled, and one after the other the dwarfs asked, "Who has been sleeping in my bed?" The 7th dwarf reached his bed, and he found Snow White fast asleep. "Look who's in my bed!" he cried. And the others ran to his bedside and held up their lanterns high over Snow White. "Let her sleep," they said. And in the morning Snow White awoke, and when she found the little dwarfs, they spoke kindly to her and asked her how she found her way to their cottage. Once she told her story, they were filled with pity for the little girl and suggested she live with them. And so each day Snow White cleaned the cottage and cooked while the dwarves went off to the mines. And each day they warned her, "Whatever you do, you must not let anyone in, because your wicked stepmother may discover where you are." Snow White promised, and she became very happy in her new life. Meanwhile, the queen thought Snow White was dead and was certain that she was now the fairest of them all. But one day she stood before the mirror and said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" And the mirror said, "Queen, thou art the fairest that I see, but over the hills where the seven dwarfs dwell, Snow White is still alive and well, and there is none so fair as she." The queen was greatly angered, so she disguised herself as a farmer's wife and took an apple with her to the dwarf's cottage. One side was green and one side was red, and the red side was poisoned. When the farmer's wife, who was the evil queen, knocked on the door, Snow White said, "I cannot let anyone in." "Then I will go away," said the farmer's wife, "but I will leave you one of my apples." "I'm afraid to take it," said Snow White. "Look," said the farmer's wife, cutting the apple in two, "I will eat the green half." And she took a bite from the green part, knowing that the poison was in the red part of the apple. Assured that the apple was harmless, Snow White took a bite from the red side, and she fell down and fainted. This time when the queen returned home and stood before her mirror, it told her, "Queen, thou art the fairest of us all." And the queen was satisfied. Back at the cottage, the dwarfs found Snow White laying on the floor, and they tried everything they could to wake her up. But she did not wake up. The dwarves were heartbroken, and so they made Snow White a coffin of glass and set it on the mountainside. One day a king's son, a prince, rode by and saw Snow White inside the glass coffin. He recognized Snow White from her red lips, white skin, and hair as black as ebony. As the prince was touched by Snow White's beauty, and he begged to take the coffin to his castle, where he would cherish and guard Snow White with his life. The dwarfs took pity on the prince and reluctantly granted his request. But as the prince's servants carried the coffin down the mountainside, they stumbled over the rocky surface. The coffin was jarred, and the piece of the apple that was in Snow White's mouth fell out, and she woke up. The prince was overjoyed and told Snow White what had happened. And then he asked her to marry him, and she accepted. So a magnificent wedding was planned, and one of the guests was the wicked queen, who once more consulted her mirror as she was dressing for the wedding feast. "Who is the fairest of us all?" she asked. The mirror answered, "Queen, thou art the fairest in the hall, but the young princess is fairer than us all." These words angered the queen so deeply that she almost didn't go to the wedding. But she was very curious, so she went anyway. When she stepped into the great hall, she recognized Snow White, and her rage was so great that she had to be taken away from the wedding. And the wicked queen died soon after. But Snow White and the prince were wed, and they lived happily ever after. The end. Wasn't that a good story? All right, if you want to follow me, I'm going to go make some witch's brew, and you can do it yourself at home if you want to try it out. Let's go see how to make it. Okay, so the things that you need to make witch's brew are a little tray, a jar, some food coloring, baking soda, vinegar, and some dish soap. Okay, so to make the witch's brew, you're going to take the tray and you're going to put the jar or container in the middle of it. And then you're going to fill the jar or container halfway full of vinegar. The next thing you're going to need is your food coloring. So you're going to add 2 drops to the vinegar and stir. If you have any glitter, you could add glitter as well to make it sparkly. The next thing you're going to add is a big squeeze of dish soap, and then a heaping tablespoonful of baking soda. And as you can see, your witch's brew is going to start to bubble and come over the top of the jar. And that's why you're going to need the tray to catch anything as it continues to bubble and foam. And that's how you make witch's brew. So why don't you try it out at home? And thank you very much for joining me today. Bye!